Kept you waiting, huh? Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the World Wide Web. Disheveled Edda here. Punished and disheveled Edda. I have made the pretty awful decision to work on a multitude of videos all at once and then try to edit them all and build a backlog and do all this. And so I haven't uploaded in quite a while, as of recording this video. However, if you're watching this right now, that means that has finally changed, and I have put something onto YouTube. It hasn't all been wasted time though. I have been steadily increasing my knowledge. So I come to you humbled and with a little bit more Sherman knowledge than I did yesterday. So the video that you are watching right now is my second return trip to Fort Moore down in Georgia. I really do want to potentially make this a yearly thing, and if I can, go down there more than one time a year because I literally love it there. Like, after this second trip as well, like, it's just religious, like, peaceful place. Like, I feel like it's a pilgrimage I have to make at least once a year. I think what I bring to you guys here today is 10 times cooler than what I brought to you last year on just, I went to Georgia and saw tanks. I still don't know what the title of this video is going to be, but hopefully I come up with a better one than that. This trip was special in a lot of ways, but definitely the biggest way that this trip was so different was what the staff at the Armor and Cavalry Collection allowed me to do and allowed me to get footage of for this trip. I owe the Armor and Cavalry Collection and the staff there and the volunteers, you know who you are. I owe you guys an incredible thank you. Unlike last year where I was accompanied by my father, this time I was accompanied by a close friend of mine who was very last minute. I asked if they would be willing to come with me on this trip, and he said yes. So thank you very much. A shout out, you know who you are, for being my cameraman during this trip. And I was very, very grateful. It's awesome. So this camera, plus the microphone, plus actually having a cameraman, I am very, very happy with how this trip to Fort Moore turned out. And we start recording right as we've pulled in to park at the Fort Moore Armor and Cavalry Collection. What's globbing gloobers? Today, welcome back to Edda320 YouTube channel, where today we're going to be going back to Fort Moore. This is my second time to Fort Moore, and this time I brought a cameraman so I don't have to hold the damn camera because I fucking hate holding that damn camera. And today we got tanks, and it's going to be awesome. So come on with me, gloobers, and let's glob this gloob. It was a joint project in the 60s for America and Germany to build a tank together. It didn't really work because it was one of those things where, like, Germany had their own definitions of their tanks and America had their own definitions, and so they fought back and forth on like what features it should have and what it should be able to do. And yeah, it just turned out again to be like not really good for either country, and so it was abandoned. But the lessons learned from building this tank would directly influence the Leopard 1, and then by proxy the Leopard 2 in Germany, and then the Abrams for America. There's a lot of features on this that look very Abrams, and a lot of features that look very Leopard. The taillights, for instance, like this whole back end actually looks very Abrams. Series tanks to provide Germany its first new tank since World War II. Turret Bub is that program. So the turret was unique in that it was the driver did not sit down in the hull, but the driver instead was in the turret, and he was placed in his own like little like gyro stabilized ball position. So when the turret traversed, he stayed straight and the turret just traversed around him. It was an awful idea, and the nations abandoned it pretty quickly because, well, actually they didn't abandon it, but they kept it on this tank, but it sucked. It was a bad idea. And the driver continuously noted, like, is disorienting as fuck, which, yeah, makes sense, to have this thing spinning around you while you as a driver are staying in place. Yeah, 3-man crew, driver in the turret, yep. And hydropneumatic, oh, that's right, it had the hydropneumatic suspension. The tank could actually, like, rock back and forth on its suspension. Swedish S-tank ends up running on a similar principle.
Whoa. Little guy.
Watch out.
It's a little guy.
It's a little guy. Let me do a front of it. What are you doing? What's that guy doing? He's trying to defuse a bomb.
Maybe.
Defuse these nuts, am I right? So unlike last year where I was in charge of the camera and trying my best to get recordings of me talking about each and every little tank, I really was pressed for time this time around, and also I had somebody else manning the camera, so I really just kind of started rambling to my friend, and he just hit record when he thought was appropriate. Completely my fault that I was not really like strict with him about like start recording, stop recording, so the footage is slightly disjointed, but I'm able to put stuff together for you guys. So sorry if I'm not talking about every single tank here, it's really just what we managed to record. All tracks, M16, it's funny, Americans just have a real big habit of making their tanks way too freaking big. We make them super dummy tall. Once again, another like casted potbelly type hull. It's not the exact same, obviously, as the M48. It's different in a lot of its own ways. Just a normal torsion bar suspension with shock absorbers on each side. Turret is different. I wonder if we can find a General Steel casting logo on this one too. This is, I think these markings are for training, I think. Is this like a training tank? Like this would not have been in combat or anything. And there's your driver. There's 3 periscopes. I'm surprised the periscopes are still there, honestly. The periscopes are usually gone. Oh, fire extinguish system. Goes all the way back to the Sherman in World War II. And you would pull these levers and it's connected up to a fire suppression system. So you would pull these and it would set off canisters, pressurized canisters in the engine bay, and it would put out a fire. On the Sherman, these were on the actual engine deck, and you would have to climb up onto the engine deck to do it. So I guess here they relocated it so it'd be easier. So you could just hop out the front, like the driver could just hop out the front and pull on it, and then put out a fire. American-style cupola. Again, very reminiscent of something you'd see all the way back in World War II on a Sherman. Again, we'll see one over there on those remanufactured Shermans. America was always obsessed with sticking a big bloody machine gun into their cupolas. The concept has never really taken off. Something like a Crow system or like a separately operated 50 cal that's not integrated into the cupola usually always ends up working better, even though it makes you more exposed and da-da-da-da-da. But tankers are smart, I think. I like to think that tankers are smart. The famous and iconic ginormous M60 engine deck. And yeah, coaxial machine guns. So this one also doesn't have an autoloader. This would have a 3-man crew. So you'd actually have a dude whose whole job is to load shells. Still serve, I think, what was it? Iran just did like a new modernization of this tank yet again. This is one of those tanks that lives on in a lot of other countries and they keep modernizing it even though it should kind of die by now, but that's not my place to argue. Whilst talking about this M60, as you guys know, Cold War is not my specialty, and I ended up saying some stuff about, I think I said that the M60 had like infrared filters on their tail lights so that like their tail lights wouldn't be picked up in night vision as like a stealthy, like keep the tank hidden in under night vision type thing. And looking back, I have no idea where I freaking got this notion, but I managed to say this right in front of a group of people who served on M1 tanks in the Gulf War. We started to walk away and I literally like caught out of the corner of my eye them laughing about it, and I was like, oh god, I've just embarrassed myself in front of who knows who these guys are. But then it actually evolved and I struck up a very nice conversation with them. It was pretty awesome to get to talk to real veterans. Again, modern tanks are not my specialty, so it was tough for me to keep up sometimes, but then I got talking about World War II and it was same the other way around. Either way, this was a really cool conversation and I'm actually really happy that we got footage of it.
Turret.
Yep, the turret's in 2 pieces. It's got like a base, like a bowl-shaped base, and then the whole turret up and down, that's the bustle and everything, goes up and down. It's to help with like an auto-loading mechanism, because then you don't have to line up the auto-loader with the barrel.
But a good lesson learned, don't follow the tanks or follow the French.
And tanks don't. Yeah. The individual engine is designed by number 1 with the top engine being number 1 and numbered consecutively in a clockwise direction when the engine is viewed from the distributor end. Each cylinder of each engine is numbered in order and is also distributed. Oh yeah.
We're not using it now.
Well, we're not using it anymore, yeah. But the British, on the other hand, were like, Florio, that's fantastic. So the M4A4 Sherman is like the Lend-Lease Sherman. Like it's the one Sherman that we sent overseas. Yeah, the British love these, and then they sent them all around.
Makes sense.
I love this. I am way too obsessed with this stuff. Way too obsessed. What do you?
Have you ever seen any of the World War I?
Oh man,
Those
yeah.
are crazy.
The FT-17s.
Yeah, they either had the
so
real
there's a
little
big
tiny
inside?
ones.
Oh, that entire, there's a huge museum in there. There's so many tanks.
Oh, we gotta go in there.
There's
We
so
gotta
many
walk
tanks
around
in
out
there.
here, yeah.
There's World War I, World War II. It's in chronological order. So when you walk in, it's World War I, and then you go around, and it'll take you. There's an M1
I thought
in
this was
there.
it.
There's the prototype to the M1 in there. The M1 IP, or no, M1 IP is the improved. But
Well, I worked on the
XM1.
XM1.
yeah, the XM1. Yep.
I worked
There's
on the
an
XM1, the M1 IP, the M1A1,
Yeah.
the M1A2, and then I retired.
So you've seen.
So I saw the whole thing
Yeah.
grow from what it is to where it is
Yeah.
today.
Pleasure to meet you. What are your gentleman's name?
Mark.
Mark.
Hogan.
Hogan. Sweet. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
Thanks
you
for
too.
giving me the tips.
Oh,
All
yeah,
the way up
that's-
from Richmond, yep. Hey, what's up? I gotta show you. No, of course, yeah. So it was at this point that, completely without my knowledge, one of the volunteers randomly just walked by and grabbed me. So the way all of this happened is that there were some volunteers of the museum who were fans of the channel, and I was making it very public, very well known to everybody on the Discord and whatnot that I was going to be here for this event. So they knew I was coming. And of course, they really wanted to show me the back area, where normal people are not allowed to go. So originally they told me that I was not allowed to take any video of what we saw back there. So it was just me, my camera buddy, and the 2 escort volunteers, and I took a bunch of photos, which they said I could take, but as I could not share the photos, and I did not get any video.
You can take photos, you just can't post them online.
Oh, gotcha. One of those. Okay. After the events of today, I will be contacted again by those volunteers who I presume brought up the concept with the curator and some more people higher up in the chain of command, because I was then contacted later that night and told that if I came back tomorrow, they could bring me back out there again, and that time they would allow me to take video. We're gonna see some of that video later on, but for now I want to stick with where we were at today, which is going into the museum and talking about the tanks in there.
Wait, he speaks French, yeah, don't talk to him. He won't understand you. We need to look at the Shermans. We have to look at the Shermans. We can't not look at the Shermans, especially when we're out here and we can like touch them. Once we go inside, it's going to be a little bit more like, ooh, be careful, don't touch them. E29E3, post-World War II heavy tank. I don't know too much about this one. They're getting into like Cold War heavy tanks at this point, and I don't know too much about it. I got these wrong last time I was here. I called these combs. They're not combs. They are for holding track links. They're you put spare track links in here. These are both M4A1s, so these both would have been powered by the radial engines, the airplane engines. In the 1930s, America didn't really have like a dedicated tank engine, so they stuck a radial. The R975, again, I would call it the Continental engine, but that's only, Continental was the contractor. They weren't the people who invented the engine, it was Wright. And then Wright contracted out to Continental, but this was like the main engine of the Sherman, especially early on. As the war went on, they would find other engines because these were in need for airplanes as well. And like every American tank and a lot of different American planes all use this engine. So this engine was in super high demand. So for the production numbers they wanted to get out of the Sherman, they were like, we're not going to have enough engines, so we need others. And that's when like General Motors comes in with the twin diesel, Chrysler comes with the A57, Ford comes out with the GAA, which ends up becoming the new standard engine of the Sherman after this, or in place of this. But even still, this engine was just generically being manufactured so much that even after they found new engines, they still made Shermans with this engine all the way to the end of the war. And that's specifically the M4A1. Not just the engine, but also the casted hull tells you it's an M4A1. It's got the curvy, it's not a series of plates welded together. It's a curved, it's a casted, one big casting as the armor. America was pretty obsessed with casting at the time. In the M3, they tested on casting. General Steel, that company again, General Steel, that I showed that we had the logo on the M60s. General Steel casted these hulls, casted hulls for the M3, and they did testing on it at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and the ballistic tests were really good. And they were like, damn, like casted hull is the way to go. So the original Shermans, the T6 prototypes, and the original Shermans were casted hulls. But then when production for the Shermans increased and they needed the automobile industry to be involved as well, they couldn't do castings like this. So they built the welded hull versions so that the automobile industry, companies like Chrysler, companies like Ford, could keep up. Because these large castings were only doable by like railroad manufacturers, people who were used to casting large castings for like locomotives and stuff. But even still, again, like the railroad industry was heavily involved, so again, these things were manufactured all the way to the end of the war. It's the first Sherman, the M4A1 is the first variant of the Sherman to enter production and the last variant of the Sherman to have production ceased. These are both A1s because they both have that casted hull. This is a vertical volume spring suspension system. So I'm kind of like, I'm talking to you and to them. I'm talking to you and I'm talking to him. Vertical volume spring suspension system. Patented in 1934 by Harry Knox. It relies on 2 volume springs, as is the, surprise, surprise, volume spring suspension is relying on volume springs. There's 2 of them. Behind this housing, there's one back here and one over here. And basically these road wheels, they'll take weight, and these arms will actuate up and down, and those springs will push them back down. You've got a return roller here, which comes from the top. Originally, on like the M3 Lees, this return roller was sat directly above the bogie into the M3 Lee. Actually, this was prototyped, or this was developed for the M3A4, which was the M3 Lee with the Chrysler multibank, where again they had to extend the hull. And because that weight distribution was all different, they developed. That was the first time that somebody developed a VVSS casting with the road wheel or the return roller offset. It wasn't directly above anymore; it was off to the side because you had to stretch all these things out. But they liked the design, so they kept it for the M4. And when the M4 came in, and also the scoops. There's also just this giant metal scoop, which again holds the track links above the bogie, so there's not that track sag. And yeah, this is a really, really good suspension system for its time. I mean, especially in 1934, this is a lot better than leaf springs. Leaf springs were fine and all, but I think this stood the test of time better than leaf springs. Especially if you look at this going on to Sherman, whereas leaf springs being used on Panzer IV, I think this suspension was better for being put on a tank of larger weight. This did have problems. The ground pressure was not great, hence these extensions on the tracks, because you got a lot of weight on just a single set of road wheels. But they fixed this issue mostly with horizontal volute spring suspension, where you take these two springs and you mount them horizontally instead of vertically. You get better travel, it's a smoother ride. Also, it adds more space up here to add shock absorbers, which again make a smoother ride. And then also, because you're putting the volute springs horizontally next to each other, it makes them wider, so you can also fit an extra pair of road wheels. So instead of these just being 2 wheels per bogie, it became 4 wheels per bogie, which also meant you like quite literally doubled the track width, so you had better ground pressure. So HVSS is a really good upgrade to this. Still inferior to torsion bar, because torsion bars just has way more customizability. Like bogies, you're kind of blocked into what the bogie can do, whereas torsion bars, like, you can design whatever road wheels you want. You can have as many as you want, as little as you want, whatever. You can have as wide of a track as you want. As long as it connects up to that torsion bar, you're good. Whereas bogie suspensions like this and leaf spring suspension falls to the same traps. It's a bit difficult to customize, so to speak. But that being said, I think VVSS and subsequently HVSS stand the test of time quite well. I think for what they were, they really lasted a long time. These are the E9 suspensions, so it was a quick fix thing. You could take these duckbill extensions, they were called, and put them on the end connectors of the outside of the tracks. That was fine, that worked. But if you couldn't upgrade to HVSS and you still needed more ground pressure, they did the E9 program, where now you could fit duckbills to both sides of the tracks. Of course, that means that your sprocket and everything there's a bigger gap between your sprocket and the final drives, and then also obviously the differential housing here. But it was worth it. After World War II, a lot of Shermans were remanufactured to use E9 suspension. It was good. It was a good stopgap. It was a good, if you can't get HVSS, this is not a bad substitute. It was cool to see one with the actual Continental, with the R975 in here.
I know, right?
Yeah, and you would have had to, this hole up top would be for your crank. Actually, it might be, I think it's here.
I think so.
You would have mounted, like that's what these loops are for. You have a crank on here, and you would take it off, you would put it in there, and then you would literally crank up the engine. Because since it's a radial engine, you've got heads for the engine that are upside down, because it's radial, and so oil will seep through the engine and get into those heads, and it'll clog them up. So you crank this to literally like turn the engine to get the pistons moving and get oil going through the engine again until it's not all gummed up anymore. And I think it was 55 rotations, and then you started. Soviet tanks had the compressed air start. They have air canisters in there. You know, where a lot of other tanks had to be cranked, T-34, you just, and it went. Interlocking plates was something that the Germans would do. So this is actually the side of this back plate that sticks out here, and then they interlock it with this back plate and weld that up, because the Germans were terrified of welds like bursting if they were too linear, I guess. Again, this is the thickness of the side armor. That's how thick the side armor is. Giant freaking thick hatches on the back. Utterly massive. And then yeah, the Jag Tiger, also from B. This is one of those instances of the Germans not following their own damn naming scheme, because you would expect that the Tiger 1 was the Panzerkampfwagen 6. This is basically a total redesign of a Tiger 1. We'll see a Tiger 1. This is basically a total redesign of a Tiger 1. And yet, instead of calling it like the Panzerkampfwagen 7 versus 6, they call it the Panzerkampfwagen 6, and then they just did an all-speed, which I guess kind of makes sense, but not really. Yeah, this thing would have been scary. This thing would have been scary.
Yeah, this thing sucks.
But there were not that many built. The Tiger 2 in and of itself, there were only like 200 of them or something. Or no, sorry, 500 of them-ish. And so of that, how many you converted to this? There weren't that many. We do have. Hey, wait, this is super random. Are you at a 320? I am at a 320. Hey, good.
Yeah, I'm just on the Sherman.
Thanks. Yeah, my wheelhouse.
And of course, the inevitable and amazing fan interactions. Like I said before, I had made it very widely and publicly known on the Discord that I was going to be at the museum this time, same as I did last year. It was just so cool. This is always by far like the most surreal part of these experiences, is getting to meet some of you guys. I do know at least there was one person we met there, one fan who said that they were there this year because they saw my video last year, which is amazing. So yeah, if you're interested, to go ahead and join my Discord, and I am very announcing in public on, actually whenever I go to a tank museum, I'm usually pretty open about it. So if you're at the museum around the same time, or if you're going to make a trip there too, you get a chance to see me, and you get a special role in my Discord if you meet me in real life.
Oh, I could go for hours. Don't get me started. Especially, we're not next to the Shermans right now.
I've already watched hours of this guy's videos, so like. Anyway, we'll let you go. Keep filming. Hey, y'all have fun.
Yeah, pleasure meeting y'all. You'll probably see me around.
And then it was finally time to actually head inside the museum. For this segment, I turned on my lav microphone, and cameraman Taylor knew what to do. We went tank by tank and started recording.
Well, we're gonna have to keep this back here. A British design in the Mark V. This one's a Mark V particularly, but this is used and crewed by America. So this was an M something, I'm sure. You can see the engine is just in there. Like literally it's just right smack in the middle. The crew would be running around inside here, around that engine, super loud, super claustrophobic, fumes, heat, everything. Awful conditions in here. Portholes on the sides for machine guns. This one also, these have these sponsons, which comes from naval stuff, boats, unfortunately. Sponson mounted guns. So these sponsons, they're pushed in right now because the tanks had to fit certain width requirements to be transferred across railroads. And so once they were into battle, you would take these sponsons and you would pull them out, and they would be extended in like battle formation. And yeah, the tank would be a lot wider because of that. And I mean, yeah, these things were slow, unreliable, clunky, big old tanks, land ships, the original land ships. French revolutionized everything with the FT-17 coming up. But before that, well, actually after that, but still, before we get into that, this is a Mark 8. So this one is a Mark 8, also known as the International. This was a joint project between the British and the Americans to build a land ship type tank. After the war was over, and they're like, what now? And we would use these for training. They'd drive them around, and a lot of the design cues from this would end up on, like, I don't know if there's one around here, but the M1928, the birth of America medium tanks. It was kind of like the MBT-70 that I showed you outside, where like, this tank didn't do much, but what it was influenced a lot in British and American design. We took this and evolved it, but itself, it was kind of, it's like these things. It was a bit too clunky, a bit too big. The idea was just how many guns can you fit onto a land ship? And yeah, mud chutes, mud coming through, could fall out. A prominently British feature, the British would do this on a lot of their other tanks, like the infantry tanks, like Churchill, Matilda, and whatnot. Mud chutes were a common design feature. America kind of abandons the idea. This, I would imagine, is for tensioning the track. I'm not the chieftain, so I don't know for sure, but I would imagine, I'm gonna guess, that this is a track tensioning nut. So the idler would be back here, I think, or maybe the sprocket, because the engine would be in the middle of the tank, so I'm not quite sure where the sprocket would be actually, if it's at the front or the back. But either way, I would imagine that you would put a wrench around this and you would tighten it to adjust the track tension. Although weirdly enough, these are land ships, so they don't really have suspension. But I guess track tension is still necessary. So this was, well, I mean, you know, it is literally the culmination of World War I tank design. As far as the Allies are concerned, as far as land ships are concerned, the Russians and the Germans do all their own things. Germans have an A-7V. Russians build not much, actually. The Russians just end up taking the Mark Vs, I'm pretty sure, especially for the Russian Civil War. The light tanks, so we see like the big land ships, at least again on the Allied side. These are like the lighter tanks. So France basically revolutionizes tanks in World War I with the FT-17. This one is, technically it's not an FT-17, it's an M1917, which is the American licensed produced version. You can tell because of the gun shield. Also, a tidbit that I did not know, but identification for anyone out there. Also, the muffler on the M1917 is here on the left side, whereas on the original French FTs, it's on the right side. So if you want to identify an American licensed produced version or the original French ones, the muffler apparently is also one of those ways you identify. So that's pretty cool, I didn't know that. But this is basically, yeah, this is the first modern tank. It's got an independently rotating turret on the roof, 2-man crew, so you got a driver and then the guy in the turret. Overworked to death, I would imagine. But I mean, this was tanks, and this was after World War I. This was like the blueprint. I mean, basically you take this and you scale it up and you have every other tank ever designed in all of history. Well, not really. The S tank is an exception. Yeah, you can see inside your little guy. He's got his 37s in there. This would open, so you have that top hatch, but then this would also open too. And then we will take, you can see this here, this is an M1918 Ford 3-ton special tractor. I actually don't know too much about this thing, but you can see the lineage is very obvious. It's got the same cupola, which is just a dome with slits in the front. French will keep using this cupola design all the way to World War II, and it sucks. The suspension is very similar, derived from, and yeah, something like this really shows how influential the 1917 was. That over there is just an armored car. Armored cars were not new. There's this idea, especially like in World War I, this idea that the tank was like this huge culture shock. Like, oh my God, what is that thing? There definitely was. There were definitely a bunch of, old, or young, I should say, German farm boys who had never seen even an automobile before, let alone a tank. However, the concept of an armored vehicle with guns on it was not new. America famously used armored cars all the way back in the Spanish-American War. So when tanks appeared in World War I, it wasn't so much of a, oh my God, I've never seen that, what is that? It was more of a, ah, damn, someone finally did it. The ideas had been around. And as we all know, tanks of World War I were famously built on tractors, normal agricultural tractors. So the armored car already existed. Agricultural tractors with Caterpillar tracks already existed. So again, when World War I comes through and we see the land ships, we see tanks, again, it's not so much of a, what the hell is that? I mean, there was that, but the technology was there. It just was the first time someone had actually put it together. America had built armored cars, the British had built armored cars, I think the French had built armored cars too, I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, I mean, basically just take an old Model T and put some armor on it, as my dad said last year. French Samoa tank, I talked about this last year, but yeah, this is basically, it's the R35 and the H35 are the true evolutions on this, where the French basically keep this tank around until the mid-1930s, or the early 1930s. 1930 is when France finally decides, like, hey, let's get our shit together. World War I is over, and this is the only tank we have, kind of. So let's upgrade. So they build the R35 and the H35. This tank is different from the R35 and the H35, which are identical tanks built by two different people, but this one's different because this is a cavalry tank, not an infantry tank. So an infantry tank, again, slow, keep up with infantry, heavy breakthrough, good thick armor, good gun, something for escorting infantry. This was a cavalry tank, and the job of the cavalry is true exploitation. And this is one of those instances, actually America and the French both do this together, where the cavalry end up building better tanks than the infantry do. Has a bigger gun. The H35 or the R35, both those tanks, have a 37, an old surplus guns, 37s, basically this thing, the same cannon as this, but slightly modernized. This has a 47, same gun that's in the B-1 Bis, and the turret is very heavily based on the B-1 Bis. Actually, I think it is the same turret. This tank was actually good. When people talk about how French tanks during the war were actually better than the Germans, it's mostly this one. This had a lot heavier armor than, say, what a Panzer II could deal with. The ergonomics, not the best. It is France. They have to fail. They have to drop the ball somewhere, and it was definitely in ergonomics. For 1935, this thing is really ahead of its time. Steve Zaloga claims that this tank influenced the Sherman. The Americans got the idea for the Sherman off this. I heavily debate that. However, that does have the round dell on it, the round white circle, which is for Aberdeen Proving Ground. America did receive some of these tanks. The French sent them and were like, hey, try it out, what do you think? And you have to admit, it shares a lot of similarities with the Sherman, especially full casted hull. The ergonomics, kind of similar to a Sherman. Yeah, I don't know, Steve. I don't know if I buy that one. This is a Type 95. I'm also gonna read it right here. I was gonna say Hago, but I wasn't totally certain. Hago. So this is an Imperial Japanese tank, Type 95. So Japanese tanks were actually pretty advanced for their time. I'm not gonna claim that I know exactly when this one came out, but I would think these things are definitely running around in the early 1930s. I'm gonna say 1935, but I'm not gonna say that's when it was introduced, but that's when these definitely would have been around. So the suspension for the Hago, and indeed many Japanese tanks, was this bell crank Hara suspension, invented by, I put the guy's name up, but his name was Hara. I think like Tito Hara or Tirito Hara, something like that. He was very influential in Japanese tank design because the Japanese at first, after World War I, the Japanese are not super impressed with tanks, but they need them. And somebody, a couple committed members of the Japanese military eventually convince Japan to start developing tanks. And they developed tanks in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And the bell crank suspension is really cool. It's a typical bell crank suspension here. It's the bell crank there. But then it's got this big spring that goes across the whole thing. And it allows the whole suspension to flex off of each other. When the front road wheels flex, that pushes the spring and compresses the rear road wheels. and then when the road wheels go, they compress and then do that. Hara suspension, bell crank suspension, Hara bell crank suspension is used on Japanese tanks like pretty much the whole time. Even in the late war ones, like the Chi-Nu and whatnot, they're reusing this. And this is one of those suspensions that like it was so early and it was so useful that it maintained all the way through, I mean, pretty much all through World War II. I think in terms of Japanese tanks, like I think automotively is the stuff they really got right. They were also the first nation in the world to put a diesel engine into a tank. Poland were the first Europeans, but Japan were the first guys to put a diesel engine into a tank. So yeah, when the Japan committed themselves to tanks, they actually did a really good job. And again, I think the automotive components of a tank, which are usually the hardest parts to get right, were the parts they got right. Yeah, their guns were weak, the armor wasn't great, but you know, for the early 1930s, that was okay. You had tanks like the Panzer I running around. But unfortunately, because of the war in China getting bogged down, they end up attacking America, Pearl Harbor, they get caught up in the Pacific Theater, tanks are sort of left behind. And so when they need tanks, they're bringing a lot of these back out of storage in like 1942, and these tanks are just they're not 1942 tanks, they're early 1930s tanks. And so then when they're going up against Shermans, they get their asses kicked. And that's why Japanese tanks end up with this reputation for being so bad, because they were going up against, to be quite honest, not their contemporaries. But again, for what this was, like early 1920s, you're really not seeing a lot of tanks formatted like this, first of all, but then also that actually like worked. So yeah, Japan, underrated in my opinion. I'd love to know more about them, but yeah.
So remember, I have also just come back from being given a tour of the back area and taking a bunch of photos of all of these incredible, amazing, and rare tanks and running around like a kid in a candy store. The volunteers can attest, I really was like a child. And the live fire demonstration is also happening at the end of all this, so I'm crunched for time, and I realized pretty quickly that I can't just go tank by tank giving a 15, 20, 30 minute history lesson on every single one. So eventually, I just sort of abandoned the idea, and I just take the camera myself, and I start just getting really, really cool footage, trying to stick the camera into portholes of tanks, sticking them up over, trying to get views of interiors, getting B-roll footage just generally around some of the tanks that I can then use later in videos. So this was still very productive, where I've got a bunch of B-roll now of a lot of these really awesome tanks that I will be able to use in future videos. But yeah, I kind of stopped giving like tank talks on them individually, at least as best as I could. Incoherent rambling definitely still continued.
All jumbos came off the factory with the normal short 75mm gun, and then in the field they were all upgraded to the 76. Not all of them, but a lot of them were. Also, this weld seam, I mentioned this in my World of Tanks video and sent the War Thunder subreddit by storm into a frenzy to add on this extra armor plating, because these plates are super big. These plates are massive. So to make it easier on the factory, they did them into two separate plates that they would put them on, weld them on, and then join them in the middle. They all have wet ammunition stowage, and they're all built on M4A3s. Oh yeah, this would be, this Churchill also, because it's a crocodile, you would have had, this is the linkage and the connection point for a fuel trailer for the flamethrower. So it would be a big trailer full of like napalm fuel that would feed into here across the tank, and they would blast it. Yep, they would blast it out there.
Yeah, I like this.
It does make tea, the boiler vessel. The British invented the boiler vessel because their tankers kept getting sniped because they kept getting out of the tank to make tea. So they made the boiler vessel, which still retains to this day. Oh, this is a B2. Oh, that's cool. It's diesel powered. Or maybe. No, this isn't a B2. This is just a normal M36. They got this wrong. They got it wrong. Yes, I am. This is a really awesome vehicle. Shut up.
Alright, so, as much as I'm sure we all love to keep going, I am going to have to cut this video off here. I wasn't originally intending to. I wanted to include everything that I captured during my trip for more to be in one video, but it's just getting too long. So this video I decided is going to be that part one of us in the actual museum where everyone else in public is allowed to be and all the normal stuff. And the next episode, part two of this, is going to be all of the extra stuff the museum volunteers so graciously allowed me to do, with plenty of disclaimers stating that you are not allowed to do this. And in fact, I don't know if I'll ever be allowed to do what I did ever again. So if you liked what you saw in this video, but are really hungry to see what other amazing and rare tanks I got to see out behind Fort Moore, and what tanks I was allowed inside, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss this next upload, and as always, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested, you can join my Patreon and help support this channel, and of course, thank you to the people who are currently patrons. Join my Discord if you haven't already, and check out Edit320 Live, which is my second channel where I live stream. I go live 2 to 3 times a week these days. Actually, I've really ramped up my schedule. Yeah, we play all sorts of games, doesn't have to be tank related, and it's a really fun time. But you watching the video is already enough, so thank you so much for doing so again. And I will see you hopefully in the next upload, or whatever next video of mine you decide to watch. Thanks so much, guys, again, and have a good one. See ya in the next video. If I do like one of these, if I hold it long enough, is it funny?